Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Welcome to Content Disrupted. Joining us today is Kris Rudeegraap, the co-founder and co-CEO of Sendoso, the leading corporate gifting and direct mail platform. Kris is a master at helping companies better engage with their customers, speed up sales, and drive pipeline and revenue. Throughout his career, Kris has played key roles in sales, marketing, and thought leadership, which gives him a unique lens to view our current chaotic environment and advise companies on new and innovative ways to drive growth. In addition to his work at Sendoso, Kris is a contributor to the Forbes Technology Council, where he regularly shares insights on leadership, innovation, and the evolving business landscape, all of which we will dig into today. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that introduction. That was good.
Thanks. I practiced that one all morning. Yeah, thank you. And Kris, as I look at your background, it's really cool, kind of moving from AE close to the customer to founding this company, which clearly bridges the gap between marketing and sales and kind of gives you a unique position, always kind of hovering around revenue growth. Can you kind of talk us through the background and how that set you up for where you are today?
Yeah. So I started Sendoso about 8 years ago. Prior to that, I spent about a decade in software sales myself in individual contributor roles and some sales leadership. But what I really saw firsthand is this evolution of how you prospect and engage with prospective customers. And it was heavily driven by email for a lot of B2B SaaS tech companies. And that was becoming a bit more spammy, a bit more saturated, a bit less human in terms of the interactions. It felt like it was just diminishing overall. And so I saw this opportunity to test out, direct mail and gifting manually. I was writing handwritten notes and sending it out to people. I'd be on a call and hear a dog bark, and I'd go and quickly go to Amazon, buy a dog toy, ship it out, or I'd go to our marketing swag closet and send it out. It all worked well. It was just super manual and time consuming to pack boxes, expense report, click on tracking links. So I dreamed up of a solution called Sendoso, which automates all that, handles all the sourcing, procurement, shipping, logistics, connects into your tech stack, so you have some tracking. And then I, launched it and quickly learned that, while it was a great tool for sales, marketing also wanted it, customer success or support teams also wanted it, even some HR teams. So we saw, really an impact the entire customer journey.
Awesome. And in that experience, you've both, I'm sure, as an individual contributor, as a business owner, and then, as a founder in some pretty major market shifts, you've been forced to kind of learn and adapt and grow. Can you talk through some of those shifts, including COVID, and what you learned both personally and professionally on how to better connect with people in each of those junctures?
Yeah. So, I think one of the biggest learnings about connecting with people is how do you become very personalized in your approach? And so I think personalization was key. That was driven by both data that we had, data that we wanted to have, and how we could create a personal experience for our use. And I think the way that we think about Sendoso and our customers is we want to be the number one customer. We want to be using Sendoso at its best ultimate kind of use case, so that we can learn from that and empower our customers. So when we're building data and AI into the product, it was really how do we optimize for this personalization. COVID was a unique time for us because people stopped meeting in person, and I think face to face, there's just this human psychology that comes from having these interactions, seeing people's emotions unfold in front of you. And when that disappeared, I think there was a big opportunity and a gap to fill that in. And so we saw a lot of companies coming to us saying, "Hey, while we can't be in front of somebody cheersing, and can we send them some wine and virtually experience that?" Or, "Hey, we can't make them smile, but can we surprise them in the mail and unbox something that still has some psychological wow factor?" And so we kind of bridged that gap and still continue to do that in this hybrid remote world we live in today, which I think has been interesting to see.
I'm curious if you've seen innovative ways that brands are tying content and gifting together, or even content and direct mail together. Are there ways that you've seen doing that to be way more effective or unique in how you're seeing the world?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. So one is, I think there's been an amazing surgence of like really valuable content data studies, interesting like executive thought leadership, even books. And we see that there's a shift in people wanting to consume that content physically, sitting on their desk or getting it in the mail and going in. And instead of spending their day reading PDFs, they want to go and sit on their couch or sit in their conference room and actually look through it and go through the pages. So I think we've seen brands take their amazing content that's performing and then creating a vehicle through Sendoso to send that out to their customers or to their prospects. So that's one way. Another thing we're seeing is there's a very early strategy of gating all your content. Hey, we need to get someone's email address in order for them to read it. Then there's this kind of shift of let's change the buying experience and let's like open up the content so anyone can read it. But then you lost that ability to like gather those leads. And so we're seeing companies come back in and using Sendoso to say, hey, while you're reading this content, put in your email address and we'll send you a coffee on us, or we'll buy you lunch as you read this and send in like an Uber Eats gift card. And so it's kind of a win-win. The customer or the prospect's getting this better experience where they're getting access to the content right away. And then they're also opting into enjoying coffee while they're doing that. Furthermore, we've seen that tactic work where, someone downloads the content rather than having your salesperson go and say, hey, do you want to do a demo? Let's chat, which is maybe a more aggressive tactic if they were more in the research phase or awareness phase. But instead, again, saying, hey, hope you enjoy this content. Here's an e-gift or lunch on me, coffee on me while you read it. And now you've opened up that door to have that conversation, but it started with a give rather than an ask. And then hope, that soft touch, hopefully, days, weeks later will be like, hey, actually, now I do have a question for you. Tell me about XYZ. And then boom, you've got that meeting. And I think that approach can work really well, connecting content to gifting. And then last but not least is, when you are thinking about sending out gifts, attaching content to that. We see a lot of companies think about gifting is like, hey, I could only send this water bottle, or I need to send this t-shirt or this bottle of wine. But we say, go find that best performing content and include that in it. And that's one of the benefits of Sendoso, where we have print on demand mixed with our entire marketplace of gifting options. You combine those two together and you're giving them some interesting value plus something to read and take home.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting and cool. Like this concept of giving, right? And that for content marketing, that was the whole premise behind the industry, which is like, how do we give people more value and surprise and delight them with insight and information before we ask anything of them? But as we've gotten more sort of insular and looking at like, oh, I need to gate and get a lead. Yes, you do. But if I need to fill out 57 things to get a white paper, I'm probably not going to do that, and that you're under leveraging that asset, certainly, but you're also teaching people what it's like to work with you and interact with you, right? Like if you're saying like, hey, thank you for spending time with us, here's a coffee as well to make that time even better. And by the time they pick up the phone, they're like, wow, what an amazing company. Like I've gotten thought leadership, I learned, I drank a cup of coffee or got free lunch, all value, value, value before they talk to anybody. So I just think that's so smart as you're thinking about how to deepen relationships through that lens. If we kind of look at milestones, right? Like we're approaching a kind of a big one. I think everybody's fatigued talking about COVID, but here we are 5 years later from when we started lockdowns. So logically, we would say, okay, the dust has settled to an extent. I hope, and we're starting to look around and say, okay, this is reality. We've had like fits and starts, return to the office, hybrid. Like, have you seen in how people engage and interact? Like, has the dust settled enough to understand that this is the environment now, or are you still seeing major shifts and changes in where people are working and how they're
I
working?
think the dust is settled in terms of like the reality that there's going to be this hybrid world that everyone lives in. I think there's still a bit of learning in terms of how do technology takes a couple of years to catch up in terms of is there new tools and software that makes it easier for you to excel in this new world we live in. So I think we're the dust is settled on us living in this hybrid world. But the new tools that come along to help support that, I think, are in the infancy. So certain things that were commonplace in the office, like real time call coaching or overhearing your colleagues on a sales call and playing back some role playing, like, well, that's kind of missing. So what's the new tech that can do that for you? And I saw this new tool called Hyperbound recently, where it's like AI call coaching, but also simulating like what you would probably do with your boss in the office in person, but now it's just done through AI and a remote, and then your boss kind of looks at the scorecard afterwards. And so I think there's going to be this surge of new tools that are going to come out to make that hybrid or remote experience more advantageous, and the gaps that were lost during this change of work style.
Yeah, and I think to that point, we had a playbook, right? Like, especially with B2B from like a demand gen, MQL, lead flow, like rinse, repeat, right? And I think everyone was kind of waiting for like, okay, when everybody gets back, we can just dust off that playbook and like get back at it, right? But it's different, right? So when you look at the kind of classic playbook against this hybrid environment, what do you think breaks? Like, what's different? What are we not thinking about? What are we not prepared for? And now, like, that this has gone on long enough where this is reality, like, what do we need to change?
Yeah, so I think a couple of the things that I've seen is, one is the return to these big conferences. I think we're seeing happen. But one of the things that worked really well for us was these very small, intimate exec dinners, and I think some of those are harder to put together because people have spread out more. It was easy to be like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Chicago or San Francisco. Like, let's do a dinner." And it's like, "Oh, I moved, 2 hours away to the countryside, or I moved to the suburbs. Like, I don't really want to drive an hour and a half for this dinner anymore." So I think there's this, gap in terms of like everyone was hyper located in these large cities and made regional events so much easier. So I think that part of the playbook has changed, and so that's one thing. I think the AI has disrupted some of the content creation timelines for good and bad, I think, but it's also shifted about how you need to use content. Are people inundated with content? What's the right content now? It's like form factors. People are like addicted to these short reels and TikToks, and how does business, you know, business users adapt to that kind of new modal? So I think content has shifted, and that was a big part of the inbound demand gen engine. So I see that being a new learning curve. And then I think this biggest, playbook shift is with these AI agents and assistants popping up. You know, as you look to recruit talent, you had this recruiting playbook. If you're a CMO, of like, hey, here's the type of person I want. Here's the questions I'm going to ask them. But that's almost thrown out the door of like, hey, I need to ask you like, how many agents have you managed before, or like what AI tool are you privy to for creating these landing pages. It's a whole new world for the talent and org chart mapping.
Yeah, I mean, content, talent, recruitment, some of those things are really interesting and a little chaotic right now, especially as you see like the talent landscape, folks, really talented folks being laid off. And you see even things like resume rewrites against job descriptions and AI automatically applying on your behalf. Like, oh my God, like it's just a world, that world certainly. I think from our standpoint, you make a good point about content in the role of content and thought leadership. For what we've seen, we're in the content marketing space, and largely, this offshoring of brand building and thought leadership to AI is a really dangerous one. And if you don't have something important to say, you're in trouble in this demand gen world. If there's no reason to pay attention to you, at best, you're irrelevant. At worst, you're very transactional. So, starting to think about the role of thought leadership in demand gen and the role of human beings, I think we've kind of seen this play out before a few times. This kind of rush to data and turning digital into purely direct response, last mile conversion and ignoring brands. So, can you maybe talk about some of these moments where maybe we've taken our eye off the ball in some really important areas and how that's potentially impacted things like demand gen?
Yeah, I think there was this huge shift over the last, 5 to 10 years on digital everything. And really what I saw from that is a lot of demand gen focused marketers, hyper obsessed with data and reporting on that data, and then potentially like not looking at channels or areas of focus to drive longer term brand. And I think a lot of early founders, even mid late stage, were like live and die by revenue, but that's a very short term metric. I think that people will end up being like, I need to hit this month, this quarter, which is true. But if you are not doing executive thought leadership, that might take years to play out, or category leadership, category education, category creation type of content education, uh, that could take years to pay off, or building a community, which, hey, day one, there's 5 people in the community. That doesn't seem sexy, but day, 5,000 and there's, 5,000 people in the community, like that's actually really good. But again, it's a metric that's harder uh, to focus on day one. So I think there's a world where where marketers kind of were short-sighted and let go of their impacts on brand. And I think that's actually coming back a bit though. On the good side of things is that we're so saturated on data and digital that now people are reinvesting more in content around education of the category, and executive thought leadership too.
You make an interesting point on pressure, right? Like you referenced founder pressure, but now I would say every marketer has the founder pressure of revenue this month and performance this month. How did how did you manage that yourself, right? Being a founder of growing the company and having the foresight to invest long term, or did you invest long term in some of these pillars? And like, how did you navigate the long and short term pressures?
Yeah. So I think as a CEO and founder, you always, or you should be thinking, hey, I'm going to be at this for the next decade or longer. You're not worried like, hey, I'm going to get burnt out next year. I'm going to quit and just find a new job, or if I miss my number, I'm going to get fired. So you have some reassurances where you're just like you're in it for the next decade or two, and I think that's just intrinsically built into the role of a CEO and founder. But it's hard to convey that or to get that into your like marketing leadership, who is scared if they miss pipeline goals for the next 2, 3, 4 quarters. And so they have to be more short term thinking. But that's where I think you, as a good leader, CEO, founder, have to come in and say, hey, I think we should invest in, our community because of this reason. And I think we should move budget there. Or even for us in the early years, we invested a lot in events and conferences, which, some folks might say, hey, the ROI on a 100K conference, where you could see some people, scanning booths, but there's going to be a much bigger audience that's going to hear your name, see you sitting next to a company that's 100 times bigger, or hear you on stage, but maybe not directly go and take a demo at that minute. But again, it's more of the brand awareness that will pay off years and years in the future. So I think as a leader, you have to direct your team to kind of focus on certain, OKRs that are short term, but also open up their eyes to longer term initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge there is the friction in even the current environment. So a lot of the folks that we interface with are at publicly traded companies, and your CEO has a boss, that is looking at the numbers for the quarter. So it's a good reminder. No matter the sort of short term pressure you face, that is only going to get worse if you don't do the right things to set yourself up long term. So fighting for kind of both of those, performance short term, setting yourself up long term. Great insight. Um, have you seen healthier brands, certainly from the data you see with Sendoso? Like if a company has a healthier brand or a larger market presence, do the conversion rates in response to them, is it dramatically better? Is there a correlation there?
So I'd say a better brand will give you the opportunity to break through that noise easier because there's recognition of, hey, this brand, sent me something, emailed me, called me, and I can recognize it. But I think there's still if you do a sloppy job at that, a brand's not going to save you. If you are, I've seen this from some of the big, Fortune 50 companies that will send me a sloppy email that's not personalized well. And I'm like, well, I recognize the brand. This is like trillion dollar company or, billion dollar, $100 billion company, but I'm still not going to take this meeting because you sloppily personalized this. You did a bad job following up while I think brand helps, it's not like the only thing that you need to do. You need to still be a good sales or marketer. You still need to follow best practices. You still need to be creative in your outbound, your outreach, in order to, you know, uh, truly position yourself as someone that's going to solve my problem.
And to that end, as we're thinking about things like team structure within marketing and demand gen, and how we think about like modeling for the current environment, do you think, yeah, what do you think the gaps are in the traditional, classic, or at least the marketing model of the last 5 to 10 years versus what's needed today to actually do the job you just described? Is there a different style of team or function that we need to have embedded in these?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind for that. One is, I think the on the sales side and somewhat on the marketing side, if you look at kind of the maybe like 2010 to 2021 era, and I ended at 21 because that was kind of like the end of like the hyper scaling tech VC boom where there was a lot of companies there, where you had a lot of headcount driven revenue models, and I think in tech and in other areas over the last few years, you looked at being more efficient in your growth. And so you were solving problems maybe more so with technology and process instead of just throwing heads at it. An example for us is we used to, incrementally need X number of new SDRs and AEs to hit our revenue number each and every quarter that went up. It's like, hey, if you're going to raise your revenue by another 5 million, you've got to throw in the bottoms up math to say we need 6 more SDRs and 2 more AEs and this and that, another SE. But I think that math and modeling has shifted to be like, well, if we can implement a better, AI process, we can make our current SDRs 2 times as effective. Or if we can, improve win rates by doing this, we can make our AEs this much more effective. And so I think the modeling of employee talent to hit revenue numbers is shifting right now. So that's the first part of your question. The second part I think is actually related to the types of people you're hiring in this new world, and the types of folks that are going to be great at filling the gaps of, hey, instead of needing you know 50 new sales development reps to hit your number, maybe you need a growth SDR ops person that's helping with the tooling and the systems to make your process more efficient and bringing in new AI technologies. So I think there's going to be these more savvy, like ops data, almost like a GTM engineer, so to speak, that's going to help orchestrate a lot of the marketing and sales efforts to drive these engines that are more efficient than just putting more headcount in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting as we think about the job to be done, right? It's not purely a math problem, it's a skill gap, right? Like, so if we can automate processes, make people more effective. You mentioned retooling in AI to help automate some tasks. Do you also see a skills gap, right? So if we think of how we can not only just expect people to hand them tools and grow, but like, how do we reimagine what this world looks like, which to me is appealing, right? So instead of us just smashing our head against the wall 98 times and 2 times we get through, it's no, like, could we maybe focus less, be more, be great at what we do and then grow? So like, are you seeing some of the skills gaps as key things to address as well?
100%. I mean, a couple months ago, our head of people, we ran an internal training on like here's how you should think about AI. Here's like ChatGPT 101. Here's department specific AI tools that you should be aware of, because I think while there's the general tooling of like ChatGPT that like everyone can kind of use, like our engineering team was like, "Ooh, we really want to use this cursor tool, which is going to help us code better," or marketing's like, "Hey, I really want to use this tool to help us create better campaign briefs or better XYZ." So I think it does take a strong people leadership team, as well as managers and leaders to say, we're entering a new era. We need to re-educate, retrain, and make sure that there's no skills gaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. I think the concept of AI is intoxicating, I guess. As you think about like, oh my God, especially as a leader, you're like, this could do so many things. Can we just AI this? And really where it shines is as a almost like companion for humans to automate like repeatable, slightly mundane tasks. I think where it gets out over the skis is almost what you described, which is like it would do a sloppy job at if you said personalize this and I'm not even going to babysit you and just go. All of a sudden, you're like, oh my God, it sent this out, and you're horrified, and it was an important company or prospect. So really understanding where to tag in AI to drive productivity on repeatable tasks versus some of these high thought, high order places where people should definitely be involved to drive those skills. You mentioned marketing and sales as like partnership. I mean, obviously, like there's always been an issue there, and I think it largely stems from like a credit standpoint. Like, oh, marketing's generating leads and sales is doing nothing, and sales is like, no, we're generating pipeline and your leads stink, and that classic kind of push and pull. Have you seen that dynamic get better or change, or is it still present? And if so, like, how do we think about fixing this? So we're all kind of pulling the rope in the same direction.
Sadly, I think it's still present in mostly all organizations because it's just there's a hangover of that's just been the case for decades. Now, not all companies, but I think it just in general, I think, listeners will still probably agree to your sentiment around, the alignment issues or the lack of alignment. But I do see a world where in the future, there's certain ways that you can help drive alignment. For us, one of the things we do is, I think marketing at some companies is goaled at pipeline and MQLs and then stop there. And so they're basically lobbing leads over and saying, sales, go do it. We've goaled our exec team around like revenue as the numbers. So, marketing can't just stop. They want to continue to see those deals through, even marketing being focused on win rates so that they're not throwing over poor fit, like non-ICP leads. And instead optimizing so that the best leads get over, so it improves the win rate. So I think there's certain metrics that you can goal marketing and sales leaders on that bring them together. I think that's probably the easiest. I think some organizations have put a single leader in charge of both of those organizations. It's I that could be an opportunity. Other than you just run into VPs or directors that are at bay, even though it's the same C level. But I think it's I think there's an opportunity to just rethink your go-to-market experience in itself. I think like for us, our sales development team sits in marketing, so it's almost helpful there instead of so they're controlling more of the messaging that's happening, so that it's not just marketing providing air cover, SDRs living in sales that are then listening to sales more than marketing. So there's some like org chart reimagining that I think can help.
And as you've done that work, maybe if you can speak to your own experience, where you've unified that org chart and started to slide SDRs into marketing and start goaling on the same elements down to revenue, win rate, quality. Have you seen a behavior shift or a mindset shift? And if so, like what are some of the tactical things that you've seen that are different that previously were frustrating to you and that are now better?
Yeah, I'd say there's a mind shift. And I think some of it is just you can see it in the conversations around revenue where there's less finger pointing and more collaboration. So I think that's been a big improvement. Or even understanding, the people's learning and digging into the metrics and picking out, hey, like really looking at the customer to say, hey, why did we lose this? Why did we win this? And caring more deeply about the customer and that experience versus, in a previous world where you just, hey, I just care about pipeline. I just care about closed deals. And now you're, thinking holistically, well, how do I, if I marketed to this person slightly different, can I get them to close one? So I think there is a shift there that we're seeing.
Yeah, I would say it even goes beyond there to customer loyalty, right? Like if you start looking at this in general, one of the problems every organization, no matter how big or small, has been, and part of it is goal setting, like we talked about, are these silos where it's like, okay, I have my island, my metrics, my goals, and it's very insular versus what you're describing, which is, hey, we all need to work together in service of the customer, and customer growth metrics are what we're seeing as like the response to all of us working together is we have more people coming to us more frequently, spending more money, closing faster because they love us. It's not because each one of us tactically are doing our own thing better.
Exactly. And I think technology is catching up to the alignment trend as well. And we're seeing more of these tools and software work with both sales and marketing, or companies consolidating tools that one team used and the other team. Sendoso is a good example too, where we have marketers that will come in, set up campaigns, and then enable the sales and SDR team to be able to send. So it's a tool that's centrally used by both teams. I think tools like Highspot and Seismic, where marketing's creating the content and then enabling the sellers to use that content and then there's a feedback loop for marketing to be like, ooh, what content was getting the most views, getting the most engagement, getting the most downloads. So there's a feedback loop there. Even seeing like a company like Sales Loft by Drift and seeing that, okay, what, Sales Loft previously being used by AAs and SDRs, now part of their platform is web conversions and website previously owned by marketing. So I think the whole revenue team coming together and having tooling that they can collaborate with instead of siloed tools. I think even 6sense, you can get this intent data that marketing wants to own, but then there's tools that let the SDRs there actually execute on that data in the same tool. I think we'll just make the future brighter.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if we all look at kind of two levers here, one is customer experience. And if I have a great customer experience, it's going to pull the other lever, which is revenue, right? And like, I think if we all look at this as a shared responsibility, like, how do we create a great customer experience and return that back to the bottom line, whether we're creating content or sales enablement or outbound or brand marketing, it all should be working together. But, because of maybe legacy baggage or historical ways companies were set up, it just doesn't happen. So, any advice? I was talking to a healthcare company yesterday. They were just lamenting on the fact that there's so many hurdles to overcome to actually, like, hey, that sounds cool. Cool story, man. But like the reality is, I have a lot of individual stakeholders that I have to try to get through to. So how do I break down those silos? How do I bring them along in a unified way? Do you have any tactics or skills or advice to do that within companies that aren't doing that today?
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind, especially when it comes to like new technologies, new org chart design, new processes. Is I think enabling a bottoms up approach can really help from within. For example, for us, when we were wanting to reskill our company on making sure everyone was aligned that hey, AI is here to stay. And we didn't want to go and dictate saying everyone needs to use these AI tools. Instead, we kind of gave a really high level presentation of the company and said, hey, we want to hear from you and crowdsource what are the cool new AI tools or learnings and technologies that we should care about. And we saw, a customer support person raise their hand and say, "Hey, I saw this tool that looked really interesting to help with, first ticket resolution." And so I think when you can empower people to bring ideas to the table versus, telling them that they have to go abide by this new thing, it can create kind of a groundswell of at least open thinkers that want to contribute versus people that feel like they're just being forced and herded along. I think tactically that's one way. And then I think the other way, which is, more obvious for sales than it is others, but a lot of go-to-market teams, including marketers, have variable comp, is you just, play around with comp and incentives. And you change what the metrics need to be to get hit. And you can, almost always expect, especially in sales, that if you have a variable comp component, you're going to try to hit it. So you're going to change your behavior.
Numbers on the wall go up. That's what they say, right? Yeah. When you're talking about organizational behavior and structure, what does a best-in-class organization look like that's healthy and driving a good amount of demand? Does it look different than other organizations that maybe are struggling? Is it structure and behavior, or is it mindset and people? Can you kind of describe what you think would be an ideal state for a company?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to tell from the outside in because I think it is more mindset and behavior than it is like titles. I think titles can be very deceiving. Different companies may have same titles doing different things. And so, from an outsider perspective in, it's really hard to say this company is absolutely crushing their demand gen, outbound, et cetera, while this company's not. I think it ends up being the people and the processes, including the leadership that is aligned around shifting things around, focusing on new processes that could have other been restricted. So I think an example is like a couple years ago had this really heavy human focused outbound SDR engine. And it was very manual and we had to keep hiring people and it was expensive and our CAC was a little bit too high because of that. We then, from me, the top, which made it easier, said, "Hey, let's invest in some of these AI orchestration and data tools, one of them being clay.com. And let's rethink how we would be in an ideal outbound world driven by, all this interesting new intent data, and not be restricted by our old model that was just a spreadsheet that we had from, the first 7 years of business." And that really unlocked a lot of doors and a lot of minds and a lot of people thinking, well, if I could do this my way instead of the way that the company told me to do it, here's what's new. And so we kind of took one step sideways to take 10 steps forward, and we couldn't be happier. But I think it's also needs to come from the top because sometimes if you're trying to do those things and the organization is restrictive of change, you're going to get shut down and you're going to find that employees are not as motivated.
You mentioned sort of top-down change and support. Do you subscribe to any like frameworks or things that have to be in place in order for you to be successful? So like, is there an order of operations? Foundationally, these things need to happen, and then you can evolve in these, 3 to 5 ways to then, really take the lid off from a growth standpoint. Like, do you have frameworks like that you deploy that you think are successful?
I think the biggest framework we use is our OKR model that just brings the team together around, these quarterly OKRs that we can all align with, and then we can have really strong cross department collaboration on. We also have these monthly business reviews that bring together leadership, not just at the exec level, but at the VP and director level. And that opens up a lot of cross collaboration or transparency in what other teams are working on. We've also obsessed over everything living in a project management tool like a Rike, so that there's asynchronous work that can be done. And I think these were adaptations post COVID where we had people that weren't overhearing each other in the office or jumping into meetings as frequently. So we needed to be able to run the company asynchronously. And so we are religious about running our OKRs, running our monthly business reviews through Rike so that right now I could go in and see what everyone is doing, where we're, red, yellow, green at, what one team's, stuck on. And I think that helps move the organization and provide a level of understanding on what everyone's doing.
What ratio of those meetings are sort of tactics versus strategy? I think that's, a lot of organizations will get into that rhythm, the red, yellow, green, and then, you're talking about like, okay, healthy, unhealthy, next one, healthy, unhealthy. Like, are you infusing strategic collaboration and conversations? And if so, like, how do you prioritize?
Yeah. So what we try to do is for these meetings, we tell people come prepared, read through the rake projects before this meeting starts. We then give a 5 minute. Hey, if you didn't do your homework, you have 5 minutes now. Turn off your cameras, and then once you've read it, come back on cameras. Or we say, hey, 5 minutes is up. And then we say, now we're going to actually use the collective wisdom of this team to solve problems, not just to do readouts. I think a lot of companies fall in this trap of slideshow presentation readouts and, even project management readouts where you're like, did this need to be a meeting? I'm just listening to what you're telling me and I'm not actually using my brain to strategize, move the needle, solve problems. And so we realized this, maybe a year ago or so, that we were basically just having meetings to do readouts. And that's a not effective use of time. So now I feel like we're 10 times more effective. And these are strategic conversations. There's disagreements, there's moving the needles, there's aha moments that would have never happened if you're just like, this is red, this is green, thank you, we're here, this is the number. Which I think we all realized, after doing that model for a bit, that it was not working.
Absolutely. You mentioned personalization a couple times in segmentation. Obviously, with Sendoso, you can personalize in a very hyper specific one to one. When you think about a personalization philosophy from one to many to segmentation, personas, and individuals, like, um, is there a rule book today that you think is more effective? Because, as we think about personalization in general, now with AI, you can get hyper focused on infinite numbers of versions and things like that. But is that effective? Or should we be, hitting some of these primary, almost like psychographic or industry focus areas? Because there's a lot of businesses where, you have a conversation like, oh, we need to personalize. And you're like, okay, let's talk about your audience. We're like, we have no idea who they are. Like, so like, how do you balance the pressure of personalization with the reality of business?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question because there's also a lot of software and tools out there too that overpromise on personalization and maybe underdeliver too. So you're dealing with that. I think, a couple of things that come to mind for me with this is that there's definitely ways that you could go wrong being too reliant on personalization. Things that come to mind would be, if you have a great personalization because you have all these digital AI tools that are, for example, let's just say sending a really good email, but then the sales rep jumps on a call and can't reference any of that personalization because they weren't prepared, and they start asking duplicate questions, or even the handoff experience from a sales closing the deal to a customer support or customer success or account manager. That handoff experience could be very personal if you hand off the data and you're actually really smart about that handoff, or it could be a complete disaster where the new account manager is like, what's your name, why'd you buy, what are you doing? So I think there's a preparation component of personalization, that you could use personalization, but then you can also, not use it in the wrong ways and it can hurt you. You could also, it also creates really interesting dynamic where, like you mentioned, if certain industries or subsegments of your target audience can be personalized and others can't, you've got to really think through that customer journey, because you don't want to like have groups of people that just have a really poor experience because you don't have much data to rely on. So I think you have to take a step back here and say, okay, we do want to personalize. What can we personalize? What's the framework? If we can't personalize, then what's the fallback and how does that look? Um, so I think it just comes back to designing the journeys, both from the buyer side all the way through the customer journey, and figuring out where are you going to rely on data for and where you can't.
Yeah, and speaking of that, specifically in your world, just curious, as you think about the place in which gifting fits, right? Like you mentioned, like just blasting gifts to a random list that you haven't had any interaction with, which I would imagine feels, maybe a little disingenuous, or, like I get offers for stuff and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. I'm not going to accept that. Like, where does that moment have the biggest impact? Is it in acquisition? Is it relationship building? Is it accelerating a deal because you're surprising and delighting them? Like, where is the best fit for what you all do?
Yeah. So, I mean, from the hundreds of millions of dollars in gifts spent and the hundreds of thousands of people sending gifts, we've actually seen the data pretty spread, and there's a long tail of. And so when we analyze it and try to help and be a consultative partner to our customers, we kind of look at where's the customer's biggest problem. Do they have a top of funnel problem? Do they have a demo show rate problem? Do they have a deal acceleration win rate problem? Do they have a lacking, customer experience, and they want to do a customer welcome kit, or they want to hit customer milestone gifts or life events? So we see it across the board, and we see it both as gifting in direct mail as a tool that at the highest level is a way to break through some noise and grab someone's attention, and is different than maybe just sending a gazillion emails out. So there's a reason why you'd want to send it super top funnel to break into an account, or whether you'd want an account executive to send a very personalized gift to build that relationship and that buying experience to close the deal. So I think it actually can be effective in all areas. You just have to, ensure that the experience and why you're sending and what you're sending and the messaging around it makes sense.
As we kind of wrap here, I'm curious about how you personally kind of stay ahead of the curve. I noticed you have lots of mentors. You talk to customers a lot. Are there particular ways that you find effective for your personal development, whether it's books or individual conversations or events or conferences? Like, what are some of the ways that you kind of sharpen your tool set?
Yeah. So there's probably three or four that come to mind. One is meeting with customers. I meet with over 100 customers a year. I'm obsessed with doing these like customer road shows where I rapidly try to meet with dozens and dozens of customers in a week, and do that week over week over week. Mostly because I can find more patterns with this like aggressive meet 50 customers in like 3 weeks type of mindset. So I'll do that, which I think is really critical for thinking about our customers, thinking about the product vision, thinking about the category and the product messaging and the content and thought leadership. So that's one. Two is I have this advisory group of 100 plus advisors that I can. Some are customers, some are miscellaneous executives across different disciplines, but I can ask them for questions that maybe it wouldn't feel comfortable if you were just another customer. So I think that's critical because I can go to these like thought leadership groups or send an email to all of them asking for feedback on something. And I can get a lot of really interesting information there. Third is I love this tool called Feedly, and I subscribe to hundreds and hundreds of blogs. And I will again scan through instead of scanning through like a TikTok feed. I'll just scan through a news and interesting blog posts and podcast feed, and either find patterns and being like, oh, lots of people are talking about this. I need to learn about this, or something will catch my eye, and then I'll just dive in deeper and read through it. And I think that's been an effective way to stay up to date with the trends and have a diverse kind of group of folks, whether they're entrepreneurs, media publications, interesting thought leaders, share content and wisdom with me, as opposed to being like, I just read, the Wall Street Journal, or I just read, TechCrunch.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and really what you're doing is like pattern breaking, right? Where you're like, okay, everything is designed to feed me exactly what I want in a kind of filtered way, and what you're doing is saying like, no, I want to know what I don't know. I want to know what else is happening, and how can I get smarter, which I think is really cool. And then just like a computer, the more inputs you have, the better your outputs, right? So you can start to really understand different perspectives. As we kind of wrap here, where do you think, from a demand gen, marketing, sales, like where does this go from here? And what do you think some of the key focus areas that leaders need to look at for building blocks for 2025?
Yeah. So what I'm sharing with my team or what I'm hearing our customers is, again, the playbook of 20, last year and the years before need to be rethought. So what are the channels you're using? What are the different strategies and tactics that you might want to deploy? And what's your framework for testing and then being a bit more agile than, hey, the 2010 playbook, we're just going to run back again with more money. Or a higher revenue goal and just cross our fingers that we'll get there. So I think that's critical. And then I think, having thoughtful and genuine approach to how you're going to leverage AI and the changing markets, whether that's AI assistants, whether that's these agents that are starting to creep into the scene. What is your perspective and how are you, again, taking that perspective and putting action around it, I think is a critical for next year because it's only going to be more chaotic in this world of AI and agents. And then at the end of the day, I think it all boils down to how are you listening to your customer and how are you building for your customer or marketing for your customer. And I think we can never lose track of that. I think, that is the end of the goal, why we all are here and why we have jobs is to solve problems for our customers. And losing track of that, even if you can get really good at using the coolest AI tool or get really good at this new growth hack that gets you more leads, at the end of the day, you got to solve customers' problems.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to close on here as we think about all the ways that we as business leaders and marketers can get distracted. There's no shortage of them. And we've kind of learned this lesson like the sins of our past, right? Where, when we've gotten away from that truth, which is how do we listen to customers, create value, have a unique position in our market? And then what are the tools to help us do that, right? It seems like where brands and leaders have gotten off track is they're using tools to chase tactics without that last part, which is in service of our brand, our customer, and our value, right? So really starting to think about how we amplify that with modern technology, tools, and advice. So thank you. Any last advice or inspiration for marketers that are looking to really kind of change the tide and drive growth for next year?
Obviously use Sendoso, check us out, sendoso.com. But also I think for a lot of people, it's networking and a lot of marketers need to go out there and chat with somebody new, grab coffee, go do a Zoom meeting and, learn from others. And don't be scared to say, hey, I don't know what the next big thing is. And I want to go meet with 10 people for virtual coffee next week. So I like to leave myself out there to say, hey, if anyone's listening, wants to meet with me, add me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email, Kris@sendoso.com. I love just having meetings to have meetings and, figuring out if there's a golden nugget that comes from it.
Awesome. Well, Kris, thank you. Tremendous insight here, and I'm sure we'll get a lot out of this, but really appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Dan.
Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyward.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.